going to begin this unit with the circulatory system. It is really important to understand the circulatory system because this system does so much for all the other systems in our body. Without this system, everything else would shut down. This is a technique that was done by a scientist. His name is Gunther von Hagen. If you've ever seen those like Body Worlds or Body Works exhibits where there's like the different kind of like dissections of humans, one of the techniques that he has figured out was that he could digest away all of the other materials in the body except for the circulatory vessels. So here's what's left in the head. And I think this really hits the point home that our circulatory system is in contact with every single cell in your body. Look at the shape of the nose, even the lips. You have blood vessels in contact with every single cell in your body. That's pretty amazing. It spider webs all the way throughout everywhere. And why this is important, because it's kind of like a mail system, that it is going to drop off important things and it's going to pick up important things. It's going to move those things around the body. So all of the activities, the metabolic activities that the cells do, they are giving off things that they don't need, or they're sending out things that they made, and those things are going to be delivered somewhere else in the body to cause a chain reaction of events. So here, you can also see that there's bigger blood vessels, like this, for example. And then there's kind of medium blood vessels. And then when we get to where you just see a mass of, you can't really tell what's going on, those are the really teeny blood vessels.
Is the big one the carotid?
Yeah. The carotid artery, right, correct. Goes up into the head. Good, nice. So, what does all of this do? One is that body cells need nutrients. We'll get into the difference between like nutrients and energy toward the end of the semester, but just so you know, is that anything in terms of like, let's say carbohydrates or fats or proteins, they are made up of two parts. They're made up of energy, which is found in bonds, and then they're made up of nutrients, which are the atoms, the carbons, the hydrogens, the nitrogens, etc. And they are not interchangeable. They work together as a whole. So nutrients are things that are going to help to build up our cell materials. Carbons, the hydrogens, the nitrogens, they're going to help to build what the cellular machinery needs. Nutrients, if we're just thinking about nutrients, nutrients are any of the substances in our body, again, the carbons, the hydrogens, the nitrogens, the oxygens, the phosphorus, etc. Those nutrients can be, like I said, good things, and they could be bad things like waste, for example. So while our body has these whole systems, I always think it's just outstanding, like unbelievable, that each cell has kind of almost like a body, where they have organelles, right? Organs, we think about the organs that make up our body, and they do all these very important things. The cells are kind of like mini microscopic bodies that have systems like our overall systems. And what our overall systems are doing, a lot of that's happening at the microscopic level of the cells. And so they are making waste products as they break stuff down. They are using the nutrients and the energy that's delivered to have metabolic functions and pathways within them. So there's so much complexity, not only at the whole like body system, but all the way down to the actual cells themselves. So what substances are transmitted around the body? So nutrients like oxygen and carbon dioxide, and then nutrients and bonds between those nutrients to make our energy sources, carbohydrates, proteins, lipids, hormones. We talked about plants had hormones to do some things in their bodies. We have hormones too that are delivered throughout, and we'll talk about more in the next unit about how some of these hormones will be released and then they go through the blood and it stimulates something else, another tissue or an organ to do something, go through a metabolic pathway to make something and then release that product, and then that product goes throughout the circulatory system and it contacts something else and it stimulates that to undergo some metabolic pathway where it produces something and then that goes through the blood and it contacts something else. And we have these chains of events that happen because of our hormones, and our hormones regulate a lot of saying from one organ, tissue, or gland, hey, you do this and make this. Oh, now that you've made this, do this and make that. And this all gets transmitted throughout the circulatory system. And then, of course, as anything is kind of like those metabolic pathways, as a result of those metabolic pathways, we have waste products. And you can think about that very simply in terms of our respiratory system, that we breathe in oxygen, a useful nutrient, and that useful nutrient, we talked a little bit about this, is that stimulates this whole process of cellular respiration. And the point of cellular respiration, which we'll talk about when we talk about the respiratory system, is the act of breathing this in at the cellular level, which carries that oxygen to our cells, stimulates our cells to undergo a metabolic pathway of cellular respiration to break down our energy sources that are important to us, and as a result, build up machinery, help our blood to flow, help our organs to function appropriately, help our hormones to be made and then transmit through our body, transport throughout. And as a result, then you get waste products like carbon dioxide is a waste product. And so that act of breathing, it stimulates so many important things throughout your entire body to happen. And so I know oftentimes like there's a disconnect between like what's happening at the whole organism system or the organism to the cells, but just the simple act of what you are doing constantly, breathing, stimulates so many important things within our body to happen. So our circulatory system is very complex. Our, in general, circulatory systems have some kind of fluid, specifically ours, not all, I shouldn't say all of them, but our circulatory system has blood, which is the fluid, which all of this important stuff gets transported around. And it gets transported through a system of channels or tubes called blood vessels, which we saw in that picture of the head. And you need some kind of like thing to energize all this, to pump it throughout the body. And so we have this heart to punch, and pushes the blood throughout the body. So we're going to talk about our heart. Our heart is muscle. So just in looking at the model here, you know, oftentimes like this, we think of like muscle. It looks like what we might consider muscle in our brains to be. And so the heart is very muscular, but it also has other parts that are not as muscular, but it's got these flappy things, and it's got some sections in there that are open so the blood can move throughout. But it's also, it has these really big, the biggest blood vessels in our body are often found right connected to the heart, the pump that's going to get everything throughout our body or back to our lungs or out of our mouths from our lungs. So we have also this connection to, this is our trachea that connects to our lungs. And so even right here around the heart, you can see a distinct connection between the circulatory system and the respiratory system that's going to go out. You have these two branches to the lungs, which are right here and right here. So at the top of our heart here, you've got these really open, big open chambers. They're called atria. And then they are going to contract and push blood down into the more muscular part of the heart, the ventricles. The blood always flows down from atria to ventricle. And even when we see other organisms, it does that downward from atria to ventricles. The ventricles contract, and then they send blood to places like here, out to the body. The aortic arch here is going to send blood, and you can see that the aortic arch has all kinds of branches to it, that the aortic arch. It has these three right off the top that are going to go to places like your head and your arms. And then this here is the beginning of what we call the dorsal aorta. Dorsal means back. So think about like a shark has that fin that sticks out of the water. Okay, so dorsal, this means the back side. So when it's my heart here, the dorsal aorta is running basically on top of my spinal cord all the way down my body. One of the things about the aorta that a lot of people don't realize, it's not just this, but the dorsal portion stays about this thick and it goes all the way down your body until it gets down here, and then it starts to branch off into a little bit smaller vessels called the iliac arteries, which they branch into small branches throughout the pelvis, and then also down the legs.
Does the femoral artery come from there too?
Yes, yeah.
So vessels are the ones sending blood out atria, or what's the other one? Vessels and
The atria collect from the body, and it could collect from the actual body itself or from the lungs. So they're collecting to the heart, and then they pump down to the ventricles, and the ventricles pump blood out to the body. And when we say out to the body, what we mean is out to the lungs and then back to the heart, or we mean physically out to the rest of the body. So our heart is highly evolved. In terms of evolution, when we talked about in evolution, we talked about how there were things were in the ocean, right? And we have a common ancestor with fishes, and then fishes, some of them had mutations where they could crawl out of water onto land and have this kind of like little pouch off their stomach to allow them to fix or capture oxygen and then use it more efficiently. And they have these little like lobe fins that they could walk around on land. And then they had a very simple heart, that their heart only had one atria and one ventricle. We're gonna get to that in a second. And then with the common ancestor between fishes and amphibians, the amphibians, they have two atria and one ventricle. They don't have a wall here, which we call a septum. And then reptiles, kind of interesting that reptiles are starting to have mutation that is causing the septum to be favored, and we'll talk about why. And they have like a partial septum in the ventricles, but humans, we have a complete separation of the four chambers. And this is really important because evolutionarily, we want this separation, and we're going to talk about how the heart has kind of two essential pumps. You've got the right, and when you're looking at a heart, it's like this is my heart, so this is my right side, and this is my left side. And so the right side always carries deoxygenated blood, which means that it's collecting blood from the body, and then that goes from the atria to the ventricle, and then it's going to go out to, and there's branches here and here, and it's going to pump, the right side's going to pump deoxygenated blood out to the lungs, and then in the lungs, it's going to drop off carbon dioxide, it's going to pick up oxygen, and then it's going to, from the lungs, each of the lungs, it's going to bring the blood, and this one kind of sneaks through and into here, the left atrium, and here, you can see this goes right into the left atrium, and then collects that oxygenated blood and pumps it down. And again, it's separated from the deoxygenated blood, pumps it down, and then it pumps it here out to the rest of the body through the aortic arch.
So the point of having blood, the oxygen in the blood in your body, is that to do aerobic
cellular.
Respiration.
Yeah. Yeah, so that's like a huge connection between, so then if you think about just the act of breathing gets oxygen into our body. So breathing brings the oxygen to the circulatory system. The circulatory system takes the oxygen to the cells to undergo cellular respiration. The act of eating, how do we get the energy sources and nutrients into our bodies from eating? So eating has these metabolic pathways that break down our food, and we'll talk about that when we get into digestion, that all of our food gets broken down via a lot of different mechanisms in our digestive system. And there's tons of circulatory vessels that surround all of especially your intestines. There's tons of these blood vessels that are going to take the energy and nutrients from the digestive system to the blood to your cells. So digestive system brings the energy and nutrients there, respiratory system, but in the meantime you have the circulatory system, who's the transporter of the breathing and the eating.
So I'm guessing like the lungs need, blood to work too, so would there also be from the left side, would there have to be something to the lungs too to give them oxygenated blood?
Yes. Yeah, and that's why, so we have two lungs here. So in the right ventricle, so if I open up the heart, this is the right side, what you see is that this right ventricle area, see this big blue thing? When we're looking at the heart, it's one of the nice things about this unit is that everything is coded for you, just kind of, and it's not, you open up the body, it's not necessarily going to be like blue and red, but we code things so that you remember that any of these blue vessels, even these little tiny ones, they carry deoxygenated blood, and any of the red ones carry oxygenated. So when blood comes into the body, into the heart, you have this big one up top, which is called the superior vena cava. Some people say cava. I learned cava, so I say cava. So superior vena cava, inferior vena cava. So deoxygenated blood is being brought back to the right side of the heart from these two huge blood vessels, and then it goes down from the atria to the ventricle, and then that contracts and sends, you can see again blue is sending out to the lungs. Now here's where, the lungs get both oxygenated and deoxygenated blood. It's not, there's no separation of like the right lung does deoxygenated and the left lung does oxygenated. It's not like that. Only the heart is like that. So that's a really good question. We're gonna learn that arteries don't always carry oxygenated blood. Arteries always go away from the heart. And so here you have an artery. This is one of the kind of like those opposite things that maybe you've always learned. Arteries carry oxygenated blood. That's not always true, and especially on the heart, because the right side of the heart, which pumps the deoxygenated blood down, goes out to the lungs, the deoxygenated blood, via the pulmonary artery. But look, it's blue. So it's carrying deoxygenated blood, and then there's a branch here, and it branches off here. So this big guy, the pulmonary artery, begins to branch. So it goes to the left lung and to the right lung. And then when the blood comes back to the lungs, you have the pulmonary vein. So here's a vein that's red, that's carrying oxygenated blood, called the pulmonary vein. The pulmonary vein has branches here from the right side of the heart, the right lungs, the right lung, and the left lung. And so you've got the branching from both lungs too. Yeah. So it's like one of the things about the body or the cells that I always think is so fascinating is how intricately designed we've become. And all of this, again, remember that these characteristics are based on mutations that have happened, just random mutations. And when those random mutations have happened in the environment, those mutations that are beneficial have helped individuals to survive better. And when you can survive better, that means that females, remember there's this thing called sexual selection, that out in nature, that females will choose the males who survive more easily, which really means that they're choosing males based on the best traits for the environment right now. And sexual selection is a part of natural selection. And so that females are choosing these, like all these intricate mutations that have come up that have been beneficial, and going, okay, I'm gonna choose a male who's got these good mutations, these beneficial or advantageous mutations in the environment right now, and because that male can survive better, I'm gonna reproduce with that male, and then we're gonna have potentially offspring that also have those beneficial mutations. And that's just, like, all of this is natural selection. It's all based on evolution. So, that's one of the reasons why we start evolution first, is to give you that kind of thing in the back of your head, that everything about biology rotates around essentially evolution as a driver of every difference and every characteristic of every organism.
So if, goes into the lungs, deoxygenated, the blood picks up all the oxygen, is the point of it coming back into the heart? Is the point of that so that the heart can then pump it throughout the body to oxygenate?
Yeah, and so the heart really is just, if we think about, like, the heart's always got a pump, right? Because the heart has to get rid of all these bad things. The heart's got to get rid of this, and the heart's got to get more of this. And so every time the heart beats, what it's doing is it's pumping deoxygenated blood so that we can exhale that carbon dioxide, and then at the same time it's pumping back oxygenated blood so it can pump more oxygen out so that we can break down more energy sources, but eventually we end up producing waste products to get rid of. And so we have this constant need of in, out, in, out, in, out. But these are not happening in and then out. These are happening simultaneously because we have that separation. Because of this separation that we have in the heart, we can simultaneously get rid of this while we're bringing in more of that. So it's pretty cool too, right? Like, it's not like, gotta get rid of the bad and then new comes in, good comes in. We're doing it like we're getting rid of carbon dioxide while we're bringing oxygen back.
Does that mean, like, species you said that don't have a septum have to do them one at a time?
They don't do, well, okay, so fish who have only an atria and a ventricle, they're kind of, it's like we'll get to it, and it's a circle system. It's not, so that's in the case where it's happening like one at a time. Kind of, it's kind of simultaneous, we'll get to that, but when we look at amphibians who don't have this septum, and they're pumping deoxygenated down, but they're also pumping oxygenated down, there's a little tiny bit of mixing here in the middle. And so what goes back out to the rest of the body has a mix of both oxygenated and deoxygenated blood. And what we really want is we want this side to be pumping purely oxygen out. And so the thing though is that because of the muscular nature of the heart and what we have called blood pressure, the pressure of the heart to push the blood down and out, it happens very quick, right? Like our heart beats kind of like that. And so there's not a lot of time for the mixing of the oxygenated and deoxygenated blood in the amphibians, and even when the reptiles have like a partial. So when they're both being pumped down and then out, there's not a lot of time in here for the mixing to happen. And that's all just a cause of the muscular nature of the heart. It makes everything happen really quick, so that when blood is pumped down and then it's gonna get pumped out in the next like second or millisecond, it doesn't really do that much here in terms of like the inefficiency of the mixing. I know, it's kind of interesting, because you'd think that it'd just be like, right? All right, so we're gonna look at the fish. So this is the system of the fish. The fish have, and fish were the first vertebrates that had mutations that evolved a heart. A lot of animals have just like blood areas that there's just everything is, the digestive system's just dumping out the waste products as well as the nutrients, and they're all in there. And so with like worms, for example, where they have a water system as opposed to a blood system, that they don't even have blood, everything gets into this blood, and then, into this watery area, and then all of the rest of the organs are kind of like trying to grab at the good stuff, like the nutrients and the oxygen, but also they're kind of like, okay, wait, oh, there's an oxygen behind that carbon dioxide. Oh, shoot, oh, it's gone, it moved again. So it's just really inefficient. When you have like insects who have a coelom, where it's just pools of blood that are surrounding the organs, again, in the blood, the organs are trying to like get rid of bad stuff, and then the good stuff they're trying to get, and so, and the movement of the animals causing that all to move a lot, it's not as efficient. At least, even though the fish have a closed system, that you have a system of blood vessels where the blood is captured, that's a little bit better than just it all kind of floating around the organs. And becoming, when you have a closed system of tubes, you have essentially a delivery system that can bring the good stuff, right? The nutrients, the hormones, the oxygen, and drop it off, and then can be like, okay, like I'm gonna drop this off and I'm gonna take this stuff. Because there's only one atrium and ventricle, there is mixing that happens, so there's a lot of inefficiency there. So it's kind of like inefficiency in an efficient system. It's almost like the first few weeks of a new job, right? You're a smart person, you can follow directions easily, you get along with your coworkers, but you're still kind of figuring out how to do the job. And so we have this like good thing that has flaws to it.
That's what it was.
Yeah. They have, instead of lungs, they have gills. So in water, they're breathing water. So they use gills. You have all of these like red flaps. We'll get to that in a second. So that blood goes from atria down to ventricle, goes to the gills, continues, these blood vessels will continue to the rest of the head, the brain, and then grab a lot of oxygen, dropping off carbon dioxide, and then bringing that out. So it's not a perfect system, but it's better than not having a closed system at all. So it makes this loop, and so the loop is constantly going. And one of the things about like the looping is that, again, it's here you have the ability of like the drop off and pick up, but some of the blood is a little bit mixed up. So it's not as nice as having, this is almost essentially oxygenated blood going out to the body, so you have some mixing in there. All right, so fish give rise to amphibians. They have a common ancestor with the amphibians. Amphibians have a common ancestor with the reptiles. And eventually with these two groups, what we do see is mutations that give rise to 2 atria and 1 ventricle. So what's happening is there's starting to be a separation between the deoxygenated side and the oxygenated side. Deoxygenated blood is on the right side of the heart. Oxygenated blood will be on the left side. So that's one thing to kind of remember, but also, your exam will be black and white, but I would pretty much guess there's gonna be a heart, because I'm spending a lot of time, and you'll see, we spend a lot of time going over the parts of the heart that you should really review and know all of the parts of the heart and what they do. So right side oxygenated, left side deoxygenated. When we're talking about the amphibians and the reptiles, they don't have this complete, again, a complete either no septum or complete septum, and so they have the two atria that are pushing the blood down and then going out. But again, it's pretty quick because of blood pressure, as I mentioned before, where there is a little bit of mixing, but it's not as inefficient as the fishes, and it's certainly not as inefficient as the insects or the worms. So we get a little bit better, and it's, you know, but, and here's it, and I'm not gonna necessarily say better, because when we think about like the invertebrates to the vertebrates, vertebrates have been around a lot shorter of a time period than the invertebrates, but the invertebrates are still thriving, right? So even though some of these, you know, like that's a weird thing about evolution, is that natural selection selects for all of our traits. Whether we're talking about us, or you're talking about the praying mantis, or you're talking about a worm or a bacteria, is that every characteristic that they have, or I shouldn't say every, but most characteristics are selected for in the environment which that lives in. So characteristics that we might compare, like we're better, but amphibians have been around a lot longer than us and are a lot more primitive in the systems. So does it mean that these advancements are better necessarily? In a lot of ways, we could say they're more efficient, but the amphibians are still thriving. So, you know, it's kind of like evolution is kind of maybe, I hope in this class gets you to think a little bit differently about what's better and worse. So eventually, amphibians and reptiles, they have a common ancestor with the birds and the mammals, and then we see the four-chambered heart evolve. So the great thing about that is the efficiency and metabolic demand is met. And there's a lot of things that go on in terms of mutations that are beneficial for birds and mammals, because remember that birds and mammals also have coverings to their body, whether we're talking about feathers or we're talking about fur or hair. And so those help us to stay warmer. And in addition, there's a whole mutation to the way that we get energy and break it down. One of the products of any metabolic pathway is that heat is given off. In the process of breaking bonds, heat is released. And so with birds and mammals, there were mutations that allowed them, instead of just losing heat to their environment, like especially reptiles do. Reptiles can not be active most nights because it's just too cold for them, because they're constantly losing heat. So they have to like rest in the cold times. Whereas we can be active at any time, mammals or birds, because we have kind of like two big things happening, or a bunch of things I should say. Three big things happening is that this kind of efficiency of the complete separation of the deoxygenated blood and oxygenated blood allows us to put oxygenated blood very exclusively out to the rest of the body without even that little bit of mixing. In addition, another mutation that allows us to efficiently, when bonds are broken, when we have metabolic pathways that happen and bonds are broken, that we can hold on to that heat instead of losing it to the environment like the reptiles. So we can hold on to our heat, which means that we can do things at night and be heated up. And then we have like even a coating, right? Hair or fur or feathers that allow us again to have like a natural coat on us. So there's a lot of those mutations that happen kind of maybe simultaneously, that's selected for birds and mammals to be able to take advantage of colder environments as well as the nighttime environment. So the big kind of take home here is that a four-chambered heart gives you the ability to exclusively send out oxygen to the body and exclusively take deoxygenated blood in, and get that deoxygenated blood exclusively through the pulmonary artery out to the lungs.
So what you're saying is all the animals that don't have like that septum, their blood kind of mixes, so like they're trying to figure out like, okay, I have a bunch of deoxygenated blood all around here, how do I grab all of it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Okay.
right, because there's some carbon dioxide in the way. there's some carbon dioxide getting in here. Yeah. And again, it's not totally awful, but it's not as efficient. Not as I don't wanna say perfect.
So is the
Exclusive.
amphibians a little bit more efficient than the efficient?
Yeah, as you go with each kind of heart, as the efficiency gets better and better, and all of that just with kind of two take-home things here, is that the number of atria and ventricles, and like kind of look at this, the fish are flipped upside down because of the head would be down here. So one atria, one ventricle, mutation for 2 atria, 1 ventricle. And again, you can see like the purple is showing mixing, that there's still blood that is exclusively deoxygenated and oxygenated, and then you have this really nice like complete separation.
Are we gonna be tested on the steps of the pumps?
Oh yeah. I mean, anything we cover is open game, right? Okay, so let's talk about the human heart and go through the steps of the pump. We kind of think about like the human heart. So, before I get there, right, to pumps, remember, there's 2 atria. The atria are on top. So whether you're talking about like these are light blue on here, or it's showing really the heart would be, and they only make them, or they make it like light blue inside or pink on the outside. And again, it's just to kind of show you there's a difference here, but really the heart's gonna look like a big muscle. These flaps, when you do the dissection, you'll see that the flaps are a little bit a darker version of this muscle. So they're not going to be like a lighter color. They just do a little bit of color coding to accentuate the differences of the structures in the heart. So just like the trachea is not light blue with yellow rings on it. So atria at the top, they're pretty open. And then the ventricles have a bunch of like muscly things inside, and that's because they're gonna do the pumping out to the lungs and out to the rest of the body. So the bottom part of the heart really has to be strong. So it's got a lot more support in here. The other thing that the ventricles have, you can see like these muscly things here, the papillary muscles, is that the papillary muscles, in addition to helping this to be really strong as a pump in the bottom, is that you have these flaps. If you've ever seen like a EKG that shows the, or not an EKG, a ultrasound, and you see that like the heart looks like each chamber looks like something's going like that. These flaps have parts to them where it's not just one piece, but it's like pieces that are going like that. So that these need to be supported by tendons, the chordae tendineae, and the papillary muscles. That's where some issues of the heart happen, is that there's weakness in the flaps or the valves of the heart, and then people have to get those valves replaced or kind of supplemented in a way.
Is there a reason that the right artery is so much bigger, it seems, than the left?
You mean like the aorta? Or
yeah.
do you mean the vena cava?
No, not the artery, the atrium.
Oh, yeah, I think because it needs more room for collection of the deoxygenated blood. It's not like huge, yeah, I mean, you can definitely see that this one's a little bit bigger. The other thing too is that the left side of the heart, it's got all this stuff like kind of on top of it. So it gets a little smushed there too. So yeah, kind of. All right, so atria collect the blood from places like the body and the lungs, and what's gonna happen is these flaps are gonna temporarily go like this, and push the blood down. So each side has flaps that are gonna push the blood down to the ventricles. And then the ventricles are gonna contract. And when the ventricles do this like collection of the blood down and contract, they're gonna push the blood out to the lungs and then out to the body. Again, star this, so you remember that arteries go away from the heart. I like that, artery away. Vein too. I don't know, maybe if you can remember like V and T are close together in the alphabet, they go together. And this is particularly important in remembering that when we're looking at the pulmonary artery, comes from the ventricle of the right side of the heart, collects the blood from the ventricle, and the pulmonary artery, which is what color? Blue. It's carrying deoxygenated blood out to the lungs. So the pulmonary artery goes away, arteries go away. It's bringing deoxygenated blood from the right side away from the heart to the lungs. The pulmonary vein has a bunch of branches from the lungs, here from the left lung, here from the right lung, and then they meet underneath all of this big stuff here, is that they meet inside of the left atria. And so like when you're looking at the heart model, there's 4 dots inside of there, and the 4 black dots are basically saying that this is coming into the heart here, and these 2 are coming into the heart there. And so you'll have 4 parts of the pulmonary artery coming into the left atria. Blood gets oxygen from, we have lungs. Another thing that I like to think about is when we're going through the body systems is think about the amount of real estate. And when I say real estate, what I mean is how much of the body an organ takes up should kind of tell you a little bit about its importance, right? Like the head, our head has main things, right? We got a brain, we got a big brain. Does the brain take up the majority of our head? Yeah, right? Takes up like, so the brain takes up the majority of the head, which should tell you that our brain, it has a lot of real estate in our body, which means that it's really, really important. What else takes up real estate in your head? Your digestive system, right? You use this for digestion, but also respiration through your nose, your mouth, right? And so a lot of this is all dedicated here to eating and breathing. So connected to the heart, getting all that stuff out to the cells, to the lungs, the upper part. So we have a lot, like real estate here is for survival stuff like eating, breathing, and controlling the rest of the body. Eyes for watching, observing. So we have a hearing, and like a lot of our senses are concentrated up here. The top part of the body, the upper portion of the body, is pretty much heart and lungs. So all of this, I should say all of this here, is just for respiration and circulation. When you get down here, the majority of this down here, digestion. So again, to kind of get in your heads that this act of breathing and the act of eating and the act of pumping blood are all go down to the cellular level to make your cells do cellular respiration, which means that you're using oxygen to efficiently break down your energy sources so that your cells can do their things and run and control the rest of your body. Yeah, so it's all, everything we do is connected down to the cellular level. Okay, so now we're gonna talk about the heart as a pump. It's really kind of like 2 separate pumps. You've got the right side, the right pump, and the left pump. So we will start with the collection of deoxygenated blood from the rest of the body. And so again, this is my heart here. I can see there's a big blood vessel here that goes into the right atrium. And then if I flip my heart over, my right atrium has also this big blood vessel here. And remember that this is continuing. So if this is my heart, this blood vessel here is continuing down my body. And so this is bringing blood from the lower part of the body, and this is bringing blood from places like the brain and the arms. Okay, so the right pump carries, you can see the vena cavas are blue. So this should remind you that that color cue of blue carries deoxygenated blood. Vena cava, vena cava, however you want to say it.
So, is it correct to say that veins all carry the oxygenated blood and all the arteries carry the oxygenated blood?
No, because
What were you talking about?
the pulmonaries, right? So this is a pulmonary artery that carries deoxygenated blood.
It's against the lungs.
For the most,
Gotcha.
for the most part, that can be true, but it's not a hard, fast rule. The hard, fast rule about arteries and veins is that arteries go away from the heart.
Okay, so
Yeah.
veins are on their way to get oxygen.
Yes.
Okay.
Well, no, not always. I mean, yeah. Yeah, that's kind of true, yeah.
But can veins, like, I kind of like phased out when,
I started talking about evolution.
so veins carry to the heart, but it could be oxygenated or deoxygenated, because it has to like recycle either way, so isn't it gonna be deoxygenated?
Again, for the most part, veins will carry deoxygenated blood. But there's a couple, like the umbilical artery and vein are opposite of that, as well as the pulmonaries. So there's two big cases. There's some other small cases in the body too, but so just remember, arteries go away from the heart, and veins go to the heart. Okay, so the vena cavas collect blood from the top of the body, the lower part of the body, into the right atria, and pretty much the atria contract, and then the valves push, and the ventricles contract. And it's not like a big difference in contraction, it's kind of like that, so that it's almost one fluid motion. So we say the atria contract, it's not like they contract, and then it's a couple seconds later, and the blood's pushed down. Remember, this is happening, you can feel the pulsing of your blood and the pulse in your carotid artery and jugular vein in your neck. It's going. And like when you exercise, it's going faster, right? Because when you're exercising, you need more efficiency of breaking down your energy and nutrients because you are moving quicker. So the atria, like when we say the atria contract, so the blood is collected by the vena cavas, and then the blood comes into here, and this contracts, so the top part contracts, and within a millisecond, the blood is pushed down, and the ventricles contract and push the blood out. So it's all of these like contractions, even though it's like atria contract and ventricles contract, it's very, very quick, like that. So blood goes into the right ventricle here. Ventricle contracts, it's going to push blood, and I should really take this part of the heart to show you. So if this is the right side of the heart, so remember this is the right side of the heart, even though I'm turning it over, but you're seeing the right side of the heart, is that this is the right ventricle, and inside the right ventricle, you've got this opening here, and then inside here we have a valve called the semilunar valves, and then it's going to contract and push the blood here, which this is, now again, the right side, coming from the right side of the heart, to the pulmonary artery. So here's a blue artery, an artery that carries deoxygenated blood away from the body to the lungs. So then, pulmonary artery, you can see one branch, it's going to go out to the left lung. This branch already branches quickly into smaller branches to go to the right lung.
Pulmonary is just to and from the lungs.
Yeah, pulmonary is to and from the lungs. Yeah. All right, so that contracts, pushes deoxygenated blood via the pulmonary artery. Pulmonary artery goes away from the heart to the lungs. It's going to drop off carbon dioxide. So, goes to the lungs. The lungs are going to do their magic. We'll talk about all of the little sacs, the alveoli in the lungs that are coated with little tiny blood vessels, which are from these. What happens is that these bigger blood vessels quickly branch from the large to smaller, all the way down to the cellular level of capillaries, which are microscopic and teeny weeny that come in contact with every little air sac in your lungs. So your lungs are not like just some open thing where air goes in and out of, but it's carried, the carbon dioxide is carried via little teeny blood vessels to these sacs, where you're going to have the process of diffusion, which we'll cover a little bit more when we get into the respiratory system. But the carbon dioxide is going to go from high concentration in the capillaries to low concentration into the alveoli. And these little teeny weeny sacs, these little open sacs, which are microscopic, are going to allow us to then get rid of the carbon dioxide and then also do gas exchange to pick up the oxygen. So now, carbon dioxide is dropped off at the lungs, oxygen is picked up, and going from the capillaries to what we're going to call capillaries to venules to the large pulmonary veins. Going into, remember this is my left side, so here's the left atria. So if I flip the heart around, going into the left atria here, and then sneaking through from the right side. I know there's a lot of things are going through each other. A lot happening with all of these large blood vessels, and especially with the respiratory system, with the trachea. And you can see in the trachea, it's kind of a major theme in the body is branching. And in any organism, that a lot of what happens is that you've got these big structures that branch smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. So going from this big thing to the microscopic level is what happens, and going from this big thing to the microscopic level, that eventually you have these larger structures that branch smaller and smaller. So now you've got these two from the right lung and these two from the left lung that are going to go into, and they're going to meet inside of the right side of the heart. And the 4 dots, there's 4 black dots inside to indicate that these two and these two are coming into here. So now we're on the left side of the heart. So remember that the left pump is going to carry oxygenated blood. The blood's coming from the lungs. Goes into the left atria. The AV valves are going to contract, push blood down. Valves always push down, keep the blood flowing in the correct direction. Goes to the ventricle. The ventricle, the left ventricle is going to contract, and then it's going to send blood through the semilunar valves of the aortic arch. So the aorta has two big parts. It's got the arch part, but it continues to the dorsal aorta. So remember, when we're talking about dorsal aorta, that this is going to run down my body, but it's going to be running on top of my spinal cord, which is on the back of my body. So, like, remember again, dorsal is like, shark has a dorsal fin. That big fin on the back of its body is the dorsal fin. Anything that's dorsal in our body runs down the back side. The aorta, big, major artery. And then you can see already, like with the aorta, that you have the aortic arch that starts to get branches immediately off the top. And these top branches are going to go to the head. Like this one's going to branch and go to the carotid arteries. It'll branch off to the head. Carotid arteries, these are going to branch to the left arm and the right arm to become the subclavian arteries out to the arms. So when we say out to the body, we don't mean like the body, we mean the whole body, including, we're considering the head as part of the body. And all, you know, like right away, you've got 3 branches immediately that service the head and the arms. And then the dorsal aorta, it starts like, it has like little stops, like a subway station, right? It's gonna stop here, and then it's gonna stop here. And every time it kind of stops, it has another branch that goes in another direction to service other things in our body. Okay, so now look at this. So we've gone through it with the model and words, and now we're going to go through it with pictures. So, right, we're spending a lot of time talking about the heart, and you have a whole portion of your practical is going to be on the model. So we really want you to know the parts of the heart and what they do. So we're looking at the left side of the heart. The inferior vena cava. Inferior, also, it's sometimes people refer to this as the posterior. Posterior means bottom. Posterior, like your posterior. The bottom part. Inferior, right? Inferior is lower than superior. If you're inferior to something, you are inferior to the superior thing. Superior meaning upper, or anterior means upper.
So both of them are related?
Yeah, so they're,
And those are arteries, right? I mean, those are veins, right?
yeah. Well, yeah, because they're going through the heart. Yes, yes, yes. So here's them again. Inferior, no. Superior or anterior vena cava, inferior or posterior vena cava. Both of them coming into the right atrium. So they're bringing blood in and in. Oh, sorry. Blood will go through, it'll be pushed down via the AV valve. AV valve will push the blood down, keep it moving in the right direction. The right ventricle will contract and blood will be pumped through. We have valves here too, called the semilunar valves. That will keep the blood moving into the pulmonary artery and out to the heart. So you can see it's like a T shape. That one is going to go out to the left lung, one branch is going to go out to the left lung, and then the other branch sneaks through the arch of the aorta and goes to the right lung. This is the pulmonary arteries. Arteries go away from the heart. Blood from the left lung, let's going to go into pulmonary veins, which are going to go into the left atrium. Pulmonary veins on the right side from the right lung. They're going to sneak behind everything. So when we're talking about them, we're talking about these that are going underneath all of this into right here, the left atrium. Left atrium is going to contract. The valve, the AV valve, is going to push the blood down into the ventricle. Ventricle is going to contract. It's going to push blood through the semilunar valve. The semilunar valve will keep the blood moving from the ventricle to the aortic arch, and blood going up to the head and out to the arms, and then continuing. And so this thing down here is, remember, the bottom of the aorta, which means it's coming behind the heart all the way down to the dorsal aorta. So if you wanted to write, this is the dorsal aorta, just so you know what this means here, we're talking about this thing continuing behind the heart and going all the way down the body, dorsal aorta. So I've mentioned a few other important things like valves in the heart and chordae tendineae and papillary muscles, so we'll talk about those. All right, so we have the atrioventricular valves. I love the name. If you're like, where are these? Atrioventricular, so they're between the atrium and the ventricles. It tells you the location right in the name. So one is that, yeah, they're going to separate the atrium and the ventricles, but the important thing is that they are going to be pushing the blood downward and going in the right direction. So those, remember, if you're looking at like an echo or ultrasound, you're going to see those things that are going, and their job is to push the blood in the right direction because you don't want it going backward. So like if they stop functioning well, they're not going to keep the blood moving in the right direction, which could back up. If this little thing here starts to malfunction, we don't want deoxygenated blood backing up in the body. So it's really important that they're doing their little flap, 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 flap. They're preventing the backflow of blood. They're keeping the blood moving in the right direction. The left side is called the bicuspid. Got two parts, or called mitral. The right side is the tricuspid. It has three parts. So I can't do that with my hands. So I'd like to remember R and T are close to each other in the alphabet. These are not super close, but they're closer than, they're further, well, they're closer together. At least these two, if you can remember, R and T go together, the right is a tricuspid, then you can like, process of an elimination, remember these two go together. All right, semilunar valves. Semilunar valves are found, as I mentioned, between the ventricles and where the ventricles go next. So ventricles, if we're looking at the right ventricle, the valves to where the blood goes next, the blood goes to the pulmonary artery. You've got semilunar valves here between the ventricle and the next place that the blood goes. So these are the semilunar valves. They don't get a fancy name for whether we're talking about the left side of the heart or the right side of the heart. And then when we're looking at the left side of the heart, you've got the semilunar valves, and this is leading underneath the pulmonary artery into the beginning of the aortic arch. And their job, again, keeping the blood moving in the right direction so we don't get backflow. We don't want the blood going backward, we want it going forward always in the heart. The heart is a big muscle, so it needs its own service station of arteries and veins. What we call those that hug onto the heart, we call those the coronary arteries. When these get occluded, when I say occluded, when they get stopped up with fats, that get hard and turn into plaque, that's what leads to heart attacks, infarctions, myocardial infarction or heart attacks. So so I always like to tell students, because I like to kind of connect all of this to the real world, is if you know your biological parents, if you have a connection to your biological, your genetic family, kind of look at your relatives and see what kind of diseases that they have. Those are the ones you are likely most susceptible to. So, like, my dad had a triple bypass, meaning that there were 3 portions of this system that were stopped up. They were blocked, and he had a heart attack. And so when you say single, double, triple, it means that there's 3 parts that are occluded or blocked up, and it means that you have to have veins from the legs that are taken out, portions of them, and what they do is, it's probably better to do this, is that they take a vein, and if, let's say this is blocked up here, they take a vein and they connect it here onto the aortic arch. I should say after. So if it's occluded here, it goes from the aortic arch to here. So now, because the blood is stopped up at this part, you have blood being brought via this vein that was taken out of the leg from the aortic arch to service the rest of this system down here. Every time you have a single, a double, a triple, it means that you've got like another blockage here that needs to have a vein, or another one from here to, let's say, like the blockage is here, another one from the aortic arch to here. Some people have quadruple.
So what is the difference between that and like a stent? Doesn't it like hold like something like hold it open?
Yeah, so a stent is the like precursor. They'll monitor people. They do it a lot better now. The stent, and we'll get to stents too, that it'll basically, like, if you have a lot of plaque starting to build up right here and it's still sneaking through enough, a stent will basically like open this area that's starting to get occluded. It'll like physically open it up and or break up the occlusion or what's blocking that.
And so you're getting a heart attack when these are blocked up because you're not getting, your heart itself isn't getting enough oxygen and nutrients?
Yeah, so your heart, if your heart doesn't have oxygen, nutrients, can't take away waste products, you get buildup of carbon dioxide, there's a lot of bad things going on when the heart muscle can't get what it needs to function. And remember, the heart muscle is pumping the blood, which is bringing all the important things around your body and bringing the not so great things back to get out of the body. So when the heart stops working, the rest of you goes bad really quick. Blood going up to your brain, if you don't get blood up to your brain, if the heart stops pumping and blood is not pumped up to your brain controls everything. It's the control center. The brain says, it sends messages throughout the body, do this, do that, do this, do that. And so if so heart stops functioning, the cells in the body stop working, the brain stops working, and then everything just kind of like shuts down. Because then the brain, it's like, does things to help you breathe too. So if you stop blood flowing, stop breathing, everything goes, it's a cascade really quickly when the heart stops working. Oh wait, sorry. You good?
I forgot what I was.
Okay, might be answered eventually. All right, carotid artery is the 2 big arteries that come off the aorta into the neck. Those are the ones you can feel in your neck. You can feel your pulse of your heart. Jugular veins are right next to those. So you've got the arteries going up, carotid arteries going up, branch, smaller. And then you have smaller branches out, back to the jugular veins. And then the jugular vein is The jugular veins are going to merge with the superior or anterior vena cava. The chordae tendidae are the tendons that connect to the AV valves, and tendons help muscles to function. We're gonna stop there because